Welcome to Slice of PI, where we take quick hot takes on the news whenever we feel like it. I'm your host, Matt, and with me is my co-host and Freddy Krueger of Political Science, Borge.
I used to wear striped shirts that are long
Exactly.
sleeves.
Yeah,
You,
and
you, you,
hats.
you saw that in Shanghai. You
Yeah.
knew how my
And a hat.
and I had. Okay. Damn it. Piyan nyo, piyan nating lahat. Board at your service, which I would haunt your dreams. Damn it.
You already do. Anyway. And anyway, speaking of haunting dreams, we're actually taking a quick hiatus. If you notice, we haven't been putting a lot of episodes out, but siguro ito yung pampalipas guto. Wow. Pampalipas lang.
Skyflakes.
For our listeners. And we're going to talk about something that's a bit more personal, less theoretical, less scientific, and more about our vocation as teachers. And we very recently actually saw this Rappler think piece about terror professors. And actually, this is very timely because I think you and I just came out of the finals week, to grading, like,
yeah.
How was that? How was yours, George?
My grading was, well, no one complained.
Well,
I did have one 3.5 from my class.
One?
Yeah, there are other with 3.0s, but most are 2 or 2.5s.
I have at least half a dozen, but my goodness. Anyway, no, but actually, there's also a lot of issues, with regards to grades. There's usually a lot of students try to renegotiate and say, "Sige na, sir, I'm running for Latin honors, or something. I have a scholarship." No, it was great, especially with the grading season. It's within the season, and of course, you made your own comments about it. But there's also this guy. His name is Sensei Adorador. I don't know if I said that correctly. His name Sensei. My goodness, and he's also a teacher, and of course, he feels very passionate about, of course, a lot of the inflation, the large increase in the number of Latin honors of people graduate. We should be happy for, but doesn't that necessarily mean the education is improving, or are people just simply giving higher grades? So let's take a look at what he has to say. Let me just read a bit. It is surreal watching your students grow and eventually leave the academe. I was in awe when I heard some of them would graduate with Latin honors, and that some had gone on the dean's list, because I knew that their coursework was not easy. I admit that I was one of the professors that had given them a hard time. I used to be known as the cum laude killer, the terminator, a terror prof, or the one who must not be your teacher. I feel I relate to this guy, and I think you do too. Anyway, it is also a pain for me to give failing grades, or I would disqualify a student from awards. However, I deem it necessary to diverge from an educational system that has been bastardized for decades into purporting that the mark of quality education is the number of graduates who receive Latin honors. To be clear, I'm not bitter to see my students with Latin honors, nor wish to hinder such achievements, but it is simply atrocious to find a graduate with Latin honors who cannot pass a licensure examination or does not perform well in the workplace. It is a matter of the quality of graduates with Latin honors rather than the number of graduates with Latin honors. As the Jesuit maxim goes, non multa sed multum, not many, but much. Skipping ahead a bit, he also notices that, I asked some students how they defined a terror prof. They told me that a terror professor was strict in the class, had a high academic standard, expected too much from students, didn't joke in lectures, and didn't give high grades to students who exerted effort. Those definitions may vary, but the common denominator is that all terror professors is strictness. And professors aim to teach discipline to their students in real life. Employers search for prospects with knowledge, discipline rather than knowledge. And then just moving to the end, I believe then there's no such thing as terror professors or teachers. We need to see that the job of tertiary education is to equip you with the skills needed to join the workforce and develop you as a person. Graduates before were battle tested and had high resiliency compared to graduates today, who bargain for their grades to graduate with honors. In the end, it is how your university molds you and not how you are molded by social media to boost your ego. He talks about earlier that, of course, there's a lot of people posting in social media about their grades, and their numbers, about the fours, about the Latin honors, etc., medals, etc. Now, I'm sure you have a lot to say, but why don't you go first? What do you think about Mr. Sensei's comments.
I think let's start with the conclusion of his argument. But then again, as far as observation is concerned, actually, I saw some of my students post their grades. These are major students. And many of our colleagues have given them 4.0s, and I gave that student a 3.0. So, and I'm baffled by this. I don't know if I'm the one giving a more realistic grade or not, because I think I posted on Facebook earlier regarding that sea of grades on grade inflation. Grades, they're not supposed to be a means to judge the entirety of a person. They're means to provide a student with accurate landmarks of his or her progress. So if you're going to inflate grades, then you're not giving them the proper materials to assess themselves.
Yeah.
So some students may end up saying that if you give them a thoroughly low grade, which is unjustifiable, they may end up, judging themselves as incapable, incapable and useless, even if they're not. Or the other way around, if you give them unjustifiably high grades, then they may see themselves as near perfect, when in fact they're also not. So there's value to grades, but let's go back to that one later. But let's start with his last statement on there's no such thing as there are professors. And I think this is my first problem with that article. There are professors, and there are two types of professors, as far as my own experience as a student is concerned, as far as my own practice is concerned. You have the professor that he describes in his article, which is strict, putting up high standards, so on and so forth. But there are also other professors who are just plain and simple assholes. There are those who would not help students, even if they have very high standards. There are professors who are actually demeaning students in public. There are professors who would laugh at their students. And there are professors who would, not only be inconsiderate per se, but would be insensitive to not only the structure of the term, but also to, students, please. But there must be a balance. So there are professors. And I disagree with that last conclusion. Which is to an extent contradictory with the title itself. Why the hell defend professors if there are none?
They don't exist.
yeah, there are. So yeah, there are asshole professors, and to defend professors is to give license to those dipshits.
But you do agree that at the very least, those with standards, of course, including you and me, should be defended. I think that's what he's mainly talking about, despite that last contradiction. No?
Yeah. Yeah, I do agree with that one.
Yeah,
but hey, go before I move on. What are your impressions about this article?
Largely, of course, when I first read this article, I felt very seen. I was more or less happy. Because I have been described as a therapy teacher. I mean, of course, I've been early in my career. I've been guilty of, like, what's the word? Bloodying their papers when remember we still had printed papers, with red ink, and then sometimes even tearing it in front or crumpling it, if it was not great quality, and of course I've stopped doing that now. I don't humiliate students like in front of class, but at the same time, I've learned to maintain standards, and it's my personal philosophy to be protective of 4.0 or of my A's. The A's should be for students. Actually, I've one of my former professors, which I kind of continue to borrow in a way. This part of their philosophy that I borrow is be protective of your A's and only give A's to students who were better than you or who managed to perform better than the way you thought. So if they manage to recite and repeat the same things as you did properly, that's a 3.0. So in other words, it's to ensure that they can move beyond what is taught in the classroom. That's how you measure it. That's the way, that's the kind of students we produce. It's also independent thinkers. It's also, if you have a standard and they meet that standard, it's notable, it's enough for a 3. But the 4.0, in other words, the best of the best, the Latin honors, are those who can innovate while maintaining the qualities of the basics, foundations, etc. They can break through that ceiling. So that's in a way my philosophy of grading. Who do you give A's to?
As far as my rubrics are concerned, which I have modified through the years, but I think I've got the proper rubric for the past few years now. Yeah, you're right. My 3.0s are reserved for those who had the basics.
Right.
That's 3.0 for you. But my 4s in that rubric would always go to, first, those who would provide a new argument and could prove that it is a new argument,
right,
or a new perspective. And second, those who could posit new questions that they have shown hasn't been asked yet. So I reserve my 4.0s to those. And in writing, I reserve my 4.0 to those with easy writing, which, I want to teach my students something that I only learned a few years ago, which is how to write simply. So shut up.
Okay.
I know you almost died several times reading my draft, and I think my draft had killed several other people. So but regarding high standards, and this I think is my next point, my response to this apology for terror professors. My second response to this is something that he did not mention in this article, and I think he should have, because this is what separates good terror professors from the asshole ones. And that is, if you have high standards, then you must tie it with close mentorship. You must be open and constantly available for students to consult you. And you must respond to them as early as you can, as concise as you can, as specifically as you can, as constructively critical as you can, so that they will learn more. And this is something that he did not mention. He's defending high standards without defending for elaborating on our responsibility, because teachers are supposed to have high standards. Yes, but our task is to provide students with the capacity, with the means to reach those high standards. That is our responsibility. Because this is my problem with the article. It shifts most of the blame to students, which I disagree.
Okay.
Because as a teacher, I always keep one foot, I always keep my own experiences as a student at the back of my head. It's always a conscious thing. I would never do to my students things that I hated when I was a student.
Okay.
So, and one thing I hated about, when I was a student is that it's really hard to reach your professors. If you want to ask a question, it's very difficult to, it's very difficult to consult them. And this is something that I didn't practice. As a teacher myself, I always keep myself open to, to consultations. Always, I encourage my students, send me your fucking drafts. Let me check your drafts. Don't be afraid to have your draft checked.
Right.
We will correct it. We would work on it.
Yeah.
And as far as as far as the results are concerned, the students who actually had high grades for me ever since I started teaching are the ones who consulted me constantly, because I know what they will present. I have helped them develop their papers.
Yeah. It's funny, most people would be scared to see like a lot of red marks, but that's actually means that you and I, the teachers, actually poured effort to see like how can this be improved. I think that's the one thing that students fail to realize. Like they're focused on a number, and I think at least some students do. They'd ask, of course, why did I get this grade? Some people go right there and say, sir, pwede kung aabot naman ng 4, di ba? Some people just said, why? Maybe what did I do wrong? What can I do better? And I appreciate that more. We have to be accommodating. You're right.
Yeah.
It's also the role of the teacher. It's not easy to reach us, all the more that it's online. So at the very least, we should be responsive.
Yeah, we must be reachable. Students must not ask why they got the grade. They must ask what they can do better within the term itself. It's also, I think it's the responsibility of students to consult their professors. And it is the responsibility of professors to be open, to be reachable, to be accessible to their students. And I think this is something that is crucial in learning and education. And this is something that this article just plainly missed.
Right. Although it also kind of reveals another dimension. Like we presume that students are equal, but in fact, sometimes grades precisely provide a new inequality, which is, of course, scholars. Sometimes there are financial scholars, sometimes there are athletic scholars. And sometimes because they're in that university because of financial needs or because of other reasons, because they're an athlete, so perhaps they're a little less developed in certain areas like reading and writing, but they're an athlete. How do you handle that? In a way that's a new economy of power, or power system. So how should then we handle those kinds of situations when in fact they could actually use that advantage, to their advantage, saying, "Sir, please, I play for the university," or "Sir, please, I need to stay in this university. I need to retain this kind of."
I need to have it. I had that during the online class. Someone asked me, "Para daw sa Rizal honors," and I said, "Bleh." How do I handle that one? Equality of opportunity first and foremost. If you knew that you should have a higher grade, then you should have bloody consulted me about your paper. You should have written your paper earlier. You should have written it earlier. You should have sent me a draft. I could have helped you develop that paper. I could have pinpointed things that you could revise, which I always do whenever someone whenever someone consults me. That's why they give me better outputs, because I have helped them align those outputs with the rubric. So equality of opportunity, something that I can guarantee. Yun lang, that's how I handle it. If you could not perform under those conditions, I will not try to equalize the output.
Yeah. Well,
how would you handle students asking for adjustments? How did you handle them in the past?
No, I mean, they're not often. It's very rare.
We scared the shit out of them.
No. Well, I'm trying to remember, but at the very least, I try to. I give leeway for them to choose the topic that they are interested in. So if they want to talk more about sports, maybe in politics or sports in, like, for example, there were these athletes in Citigov. They wanted to have an advocacy about more funding in athletic programs in public schools and private schools. And that's great. It's something that they're personally affected by, and something to stick to things that they know. So for me, I usually make my requirements flexible enough to cater to their own interests and their personal questions. That they're in a way their intellectual and personal curiosities. And I think that's part of, in a way, what our education system should be about. It should not be about passing tests, because in a way that's been the culture in senior high school and high school. In a way, you get into college, right, passing a test. It's getting this much, in choosing multiple choice, true or false, etc. And while it's necessary at certain stages to perhaps motivate a level of competition or in motivation, ambition, but at the same time, especially since we're in college, it should be catered more to, again, asking and answering your own questions. At least, again, maybe because we're in the social sciences, so perhaps it might be different from the situation that the sensei is talking about. My God, it's literally named Sensei. So, yeah,
that's why I say author.
Yeah, but again, I do remember, besides, of course, holding grades, terror profs, regardless of how they grade, should also, and this is part of my personal philosophy as a teacher, you should in a way provide some adversity and challenge in such a way that that will help them grow, but at the same time they should be interested in taking up the challenge. It should be in a way consensual. Well, again, it's all consensual since they entered the classroom, they enrolled, but at the same time, it has to be, they should be challenged and enticed to take up the challenge, because that's how the growth of students should do. And in a way, when students whine about, it's too high, well, of course, how else are you supposed to learn? It has to be more difficult. If you're coming into college and it's easier than high school, they should demand your money back. And if it's too easy, I mean, a few people, and I remember a few people in class, like some people actually complain about easy A professors. Like they didn't feel like they learned anything, you know.
Yeah.
I even my own and back in the past, I won't say who, but yeah, it's like you feel you didn't earn that A. It's more satisfying if you've gotten through a level of challenge and adversity. So yeah, in a way, adversity, births great graduates.
Yeah, and I think it's partially based on our culture of education,
Hmm.
which I think the author, to an extent, had succinctly recognized.
Yeah.
Our culture of education is not it's not geared towards education.
Hmm.
Our culture is not geared towards learning, to be more specific. That is the
Right.
distinction between education and learning.
Hmm.
We may have an educational system, but our culture of education is not geared towards learning. It's geared towards getting a job. And
it's also geared towards, again, comparison and competition, healthy or unhealthy, depends. No, but mostly it's unhealthy. Sometimes they compare test scores, and you feel, and those that get lower feel terrible about themselves. So that's another thing. It contributes to the mental health crisis.
No, and we're also obsessed with grades, which, again, this is obsession with grades is a bad combination with grade inflation. It's a vicious cycle. I don't think many teachers and many students have an appreciation of what grades are. Yeah. Because they were brought up in a society wherein grades are given more weight than it should have. And they meet professors who eventually bend the stick the other way, who would not give any value to grades, hence, just throw around 4.0s. And this is an imbalance, really. And I think this is what is implied by the paper itself, which is an imbalance in its own right, because the paper didn't look at other certain issues that I've mentioned earlier on. Pero then again, how the hell can we deal with this thing? How can we deal with this?
There are people who actually, mention about reforming grading system or taking away grades at all. In fact, there are some schools that don't give any grades.
Pass or fail?
Yeah, maybe that something like that. They either pass or fail, but they don't really rank or in these increments or from 1 to 100. But what I don't know. Personally, I think in a way we can maintain the grading system, but it should mean what they always meant. That is, again, like performance, but not your self-worth, if that makes sense.
Yes. Hence, you must have very clear, specified, and sophisticated rubrics.
Yeah.
And I think that's the bridge between the qualitative and quantitative aspects of grading.
Yes.
Rubric. Kaya mahalagang rubric, and the professor must stick with the rubric.
Right. Like I even tell every time before I begin class, and we're saying this before the next term, that the A's, I'm not an easy A, and the A's are for those who move beyond in a way, who are able to incorporate things beyond the lessons. They're able to transcend the lessons.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're able to repeat my words 100%, you get a 3. But if you want a 4, you need to even you have to prove that you're better than me, or better than the classroom, or what we are taught in the classroom, without actually going off the rails. There's still a link, but yeah. So that's how, in a way, it has the pursuit of the 4.0 or the 1.0, depending on your grade system. The A should entice students and shouldn't make them feel pressured. But in a way,
enough pressure.
Enough pressure. It shouldn't, in a way, tie them to their self-worth, but it should at least entice them enough to move, to go beyond what is expected. Yeah, for excellence.
Yeah.
Plus ultra. Animo.
Yeah. And as far as I'm concerned, it's also the responsibility of the professor to an extent, protect the students from the limitations of the system. And this is especially true for us, kasi trisem tayo eh. We must, to an extent, protect our students from the lousy piece of shit we call trisem system. And personally, this has been my practice for a long time. The papers are due in the finals week. And I don't give quizzes because quizzes are stupid.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's how I protect my students from the limitations of the Trizen system. I give them as much free time as they can, but it's also their responsibility to consult me, keep in touch with me, and send their drafts. And it's it's very difficult to send drafts. That's one thing that I ask from my students. They must send drafts.
It takes in a way courage to show it incomplete work.
Yeah. So I think that the article is lopsided. It may be insightful. It may give sense of appreciation from self-identifying terror professors.
Yeah.
But end of the day, I say this: terror professors, they don't need defense. That is the uselessness of this entire article to an extent.
Yeah,
they don't need defense.
Yeah, it's good to have standards. Standards are necessary for education, but the standards are made for the student, not students for the standard.
Yeah.
And
the professor must be a bridge.
It should in a way challenge them to make them better, not to make them feel worse. Yeah,
and there are professors who are actually assholes who would see this article and say, "I'm doing the right thing," when in fact they're not. So I say no. Terror professors, terror professors are actually a result of the problems of the education system and the culture. There are terror professors because the culture is not aligned with the system and with the people in it. And the culture is not conducive to learning. I think terror professors emerge if the education culture is not conducive to learning.
There are even some instances, well, I can't tell well, but sometimes there are some teachers that might feel threatened or intimidated by students, or if the students actually maybe prove better than the professor, they something push them down and use. I don't think. I mean, I'd be honest. I was tempted, but it never affected their grades, despite me being pissed off at them.
But it is tempting, and if it tempted you, then the same temptation can face other professors, because again, end of the day, professors, we are in a position of authority in the classroom.
Yes,
and it is a power dynamic. We can feel threatened, or
sometimes even in subjects like politics. When things can be heated and very personal. What if the views of the students opposed by teachers and vice versa? What happens when they submit something like that? And it's a question.
Good enough that I regarding that one, regarding threatened. I have built a tendency to give higher grades to someone who can threaten me. I'll give one example.
Okay.
I'm proud of this. I actually asked my student if she can revise her paper and submit it somewhere. She gave me a paper, the usual Machiavelli paper, the review article in Machiavelli. But her argument was against Machiavelli and everything he stood for. And the article was framed in such a way that it also criticized commonplace interpretation of Machiavelli. So her argument was internal. So she actually drew out the actual dysfunctional things in Machiavelli's argument. And I felt threatened by it. And I said, I'm going to give this shit a 4. And I gave her a 4. Medyo na imbalance lang kasi the group paper, I think, was not that good. So medyo, but the paper itself, even if it threatened, and I told her, I gave her my comments. I told her, revise this, send it somewhere, send it to Rappler if you want.
Not Rappler, no.
But yung kasi that's another thing. Professors, teachers who are insecure about themselves, they would use the lectern to terrorize students just to give themselves a power tripping. May nagpa-power trip talaga. And again, as I said, do not defend terror professors, because terror professors, including myself, we are a symptom of a problem. We don't defend the symptom.
Right.
You explain it and you try to make a nuanced argument out of it, or you nuanced analysis of it.
I think the thing about the scholarship is their very access to education is threatened by grades, and that actually, it's also symptomatic. I mean, in some ways, in some systems, there are students who keep on trying until they choose not to anymore, but some people, like, because of they failed like this much many times, they're completely gone, like forever, so that's unfortunate. And sometimes grades are their only lifeline. So that's the system of like their access to education is dependent on the grades.
Yeah.
So that's sad, so because of the economic situation.
Yeah. So the existence of their professors, we are a symptom of a problem. It depends. Maybe systematic problem of culture, problem of economics, but we are a symptom problem, and you don't defend the symptom.
But that also doesn't mean that we should always be like the other way around, which is like overly approving. In fact, the ideal, we should reward those who dare challenge us. But at the same time, also, well, once we're challenged, challenge them further, add more difficulty. But but again, of course, by giving them more, reward them beyond like the regular student. But again, you have to continue to challenge them. So that's,
and teachers should learn from students. That's another learning thing that I had. I give good grades to students that I learn new things from.
Oh no, one of the best projects in Citygov ever was like they managed to make a webinar for trainings teachers to use Google for like a Google Meet and Zoom, because they came from a public school. So they went back to their public school and provided, and that's like, for me, my goodness, it's simple, but it's also addressing a very direct problem that clearly their public school was not prepared for. It was early in the pandemic. It was like, wow. Again, it's simple and it's also effective. They managed to get great feedback from their teachers. So
this article is an oversimplification to an extent, and it's not justifiable, sadly. The simplification is fine, but oversimplification is unjustifiable. Too bad this one is.
No, but at the very least, like, in a way, we're on the same side with regards to inflation. I think we do need to maintain the standard. We just need not ignore the real reality, like what you said. There are real problems. There are professors, and while it is important to challenge your students, it's also important, like, we have a responsibility to educate and not to power trip.
Never power trip. Again, let me repeat, high standards. Again, this is my main beef against this article, because he quote unquote defends high standards without mentioning the responsibility of professors. And this is our responsibility. High standards must be tied with close mentorship. If kung walang mentorship and you have high standards, you are an asshole. If you're not available for consultations, if you're always away, if you're not, if you're not accessible, if you don't give feedback, and you still have high standards, you're a dipshit. You're not supposed to be teaching. Simple as that. I would say that to anyone listening here. If you're like that, you're not supposed to be teaching. Go somewhere else and preach.
Wow, daming hugot
Kasi I have been a student, and I have met asshole professors, and I always keep that in mind. I may be terrifying. I may scare the shit out of my students based on my appearance. But I'm consciously trying not to. Ewan ko, bakit pa rin sila tatakot sa akin? Probably my voice. I'm not trying to be a terror professor during this entire online class, but they're still afraid of me for some reason.
Well, we'll figure that out soon. But that's a great discussion for this meaty slice of PI. I will be back with more episodes and discussions, more meaty and substantial discussions. We'll call it a new season. Maybe in August.
No. New season in September. September naman tayo. So this is just I hate this.
It was a quick break because
because it's been a long
more grades. But we'll be back with regular episodes in August with great guests and great topics on pressing political issues. But until the next episode,
magandang gabi, mga ka-PI.